Hello and welcome back, everyone. That means you. Veronica, I would like to start today with a mild rant. The topic is going to be some cultural criticism, but first off, will you tolerate my rant here?
Go for it.
Okay, so this is a rant about rules and systems. When a company, an organization, a group makes a rule so that things can work more efficiently, it causes me great angst when I follow the rules and the system doesn't work. And then I have to break the rules to get the system to work. Case in point, I've been to Starbucks twice in the last 2 days, and each time they failed to produce a very, very simple order for me until 10 minutes after it was supposed to be out. I went back to the counter and had to just ask for them to give it to me without any receipt or evidence that I had paid for it. This just... Can we have systems that work? Is that too much to ask?
Is it the system, or is it the people at whatever Starbucks you went to that are just not?
I don't know. The fact that it happened once in Southern California and then again in Dallas, Fort Worth, makes me think there may be something systemic going on. In a similar vein, I'm of the strong opinion that fast food restaurants should have two lines. They should have a line for the people who ordered ahead and whose order is complete, and a line for the people who need to figure out what the heck they are doing there, because I don't want to be behind them.
Yeah, like a speed line, or because almost every fast food place now has an app. I mean, Starbucks has an app.
Yeah,
and if you've ordered ahead and you put in, whatever the pickup time is, then yes, you should absolutely be in a different lane. Just like toll roads, you have one lane for people with Smart Pass, and you have one lane for people who are trying to dig change out of the bottom of their car seat.
yes. And I don't mind coexisting. I am of the great benevolent opinion that coexisting in a world with people who are less decisive than myself is something I'm quite willing to tolerate, just not in all conditions. Okay, well, that's what I wanted to start with. And that also gave me an opportunity to pull up.
It's very germane to our current topic.
Exactly. So today's topic, we're doing a little bit of culture warsy stuff. So Veronica, this is an article you sent me. The main article, this harks to roughly Christmas/New Year's 2024, end of 2024. Donald Trump has been elected president. Elon Musk is on his coattails, and debate arises among the right about immigration, skilled immigration, H-1B visas, and it sort of devolves into the standard of living for modern Americans. So it began with this argument between Elon Musk, sort of on the pro-immigration, we need skilled immigration, or at least it will greatly help America and Americans to have skilled immigration. And then you have the sort of more hardcore America first. No, we elected Trump, they say, because we want Americans to get the best stuff and the best opportunities. And then it sort of devolved into some of the more, what would we call these people? Specifically, types like Matt Walsh and Chris Rufo, who are sort of very, very hardcore ideologue, conservative types, basically telling younger people, and younger would basically mean millennials and younger, I think, or at least later millennials and younger, stop complaining about standards of living being low. We picked ourselves up by our what is it, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Yeah, you can't pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Anyway, Matt Walsh picked himself up by his bootstraps. So you should too, young man, young woman. So specifically, the article you sent that I read, it's from the conservative sort of culture warsy news site called Not the Bee. So this is started by the same guy who started the Babylon Bee, but this is sort of his news oriented site where he and his writers talk about news stories that sound like they're a joke but are not. So anyway, the title of this is "The Conservative Sphere is Kung Fu Fighting Again Over Panda Express, UPS, and Entitled Americans Who Want Good Jobs. Let's talk about it." So Veronica, why did you want to talk about this in the first place?
Um, I think primarily, so this is not, I would say, like the be all and end all article. It was simply the most recent one
Beal.
that I had seen.
See what you did
Uh,
there.
no, it was simply the most recent one I had seen on this topic, because you're right. It's sort of been going back and forth, different people sharing their opinions on, you know, are millennials too lazy, or are they not lazy? Or is it an immigration problem? Is it an inflation problem? Is it a DEI problem? And everyone seemed to sort of have their opinion. And I think even before Trump was elected, this was sort of being bandied about between different groups, arguing about what exactly the problem was and what exactly the solution would be. So I thought it would be interesting to talk about, and it's something that I think, and this may just be my personal experience, but I there's a factor that was applicable to me that I've never seen raised in any of these articles. So I don't know. I could throw it out there. Maybe there's someone else who's also had this happen.
Well, let's start with a privilege disclaimer. Um, we're both millennials. We're both fairly roughly right in the middle of millennial. You're younger than me, but we're both millennials. I think both you and I have struggled to some extent with college debt and with low income jobs. However, I think both of us find ourselves in reasonably comfortable situations now. So I just want to start with that. I am not an 80-hour a week manager at a Sheets or something.
Sure.
Barely
And
making enough money to buy a home on.
yeah, I mean, we're both living. I don't know what percent of the average I would put us at, but like, neither of us are on benefits. We each have a full-time job, so
Yeah,
yeah.
but I think part of the reason this is a germane topic for me is for one thing, I have been there to some extent, and for another thing, many of my friends, and some of our family members, uh, and some of my coworkers do find themselves in the place sort of described by this article, a situation that's sort of unique to millennials and younger people in terms of what it's like to live in modern America under the current sort of general cultural and economic circumstances. But what was it about this article that you found calling out to you particularly?
Um, well, so I guess reading through it, I don't think I agree with any of these people entirely. um, so I think part of it, and again, this is just simply what I've experienced, and I think probably you as well, Jacob, is part of the problem is that there's a huge disconnect between millennials and those younger than they are, and the previous generations.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not helping either side at all. Um, I think simply because there's been a shift in the economy and working conditions, and I don't know how to get past that disconnect. But that, I think, fuels a lot of the back and forth in that the two sides a lot of times just fundamentally don't understand where the other person is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get into these arguments where, in a way, both sides are sort of correct, but they don't understand that because they can't put themselves in the other side's shoes.
Yeah. Let me say something to that briefly, which may be worth having a full discussion on at a later point, which is that the demographic situation that the entire developed world, and this extends to sort of the uh, aging industrial powerhouses like China as well. The demographic situation we find ourselves in maybe hasn't been seen since like the Black Death. We're talking 800 years ago, 900 years ago. Specifically, what I'm talking about is there are significantly fewer young people than there are old people. And certainly since the start of the Industrial Revolution in the early 1800s in the United Kingdom, this has never really happened to a developed or significantly developing economy before. So I think to some extent, everyone can be given a little grace for not really understanding the situation that they find themselves in. Um, and to what degree you want to assess blame, that it's going to depend. One statistic I just want to throw at you, Veronica, to see how close you are on this is you're familiar with the different kinds of way we can sort of find the middle ground mathematically in things.
Mhm.
So average would be you take everything, you throw it all together, and you divide by the total number. Blah blah blah. Mode is what number you find the most of. So
Right.
if I have a 1 and I have two twos and I have a 47, my mode is 2 because I have two twos. So it's just telling me what I have the most of. Among white men in the United States, what do you think the mode age is? In other words,
Oh.
are there more 1-year-old white men, 2-year-old white men, 3-year-old white men, 80-year-old white men? What age do you think are the most living white men right now in the United States?
Oh. I'm going to go with 35.
Try 59.
59. That's insane.
59.
Well,
Yeah. So
this explains why I'm not married yet.
yeah, there are more 59-year-old white men than there are any other age of white men.
Interesting.
So this is explained by a variety of phenomena, but more than anything else, declining birth rate.
And is it? I assume it's a bell curve around 59.
It's not quite a bell curve. If you actually, this is getting a little in the mathematical weeds for some viewers or listeners, but we might pull up population curves later. It's
Okay.
basic. It basically matches the population curve, where right now the fattest part of the curve on the male side is just at the end of the baby boom.
Okay.
So we're at the point where baby boomers are getting old enough that the high point of the baby boom, we're starting to see natural decline in that population due to just death from natural causes. Um, but still, the highest numbers are there. So this explains why, for example, no presidential candidate anywhere can touch entitlement reform. No one can touch Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and anything that's going to make old people better off, because right now old people run everything. And it's not just old people in the halls of power, it's that the electorate is old people. More so than ever before, more so at least since the foundation of the United States. This has never been seen before. So anyway, sorry for the lengthy digression there. But any
Interesting.
reflections on this?
No, it's way higher than I would thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't know if I have anything profound to say about that.
Yeah. So let's jump back to this question of immigration, and specifically, so we'll I think if it makes sense, we'll start with the immigration bit and then get to the cost of living bit.
Sure.
So this started with Elon Musk. I mean, he just goes on Twitter kind of sprees where he just sort of lets his mind run wild. I think in part he bought the platform because he has too much fun on it and he didn't want it to be changed. So one thing I wanted to note is Musk, being a South African himself, who came first to Canada in his late teens or early 20s and then the U.S. Went through the U.S. He went to the University of Pennsylvania, which is quite a prestigious university. He seems not to recognize a substantial difference between the United States and other places. In other words, his focus seems to be on we need smart, driven people, and that's what matters. Do you agree with that? Did you notice that?
Yeah, I would say he maybe doesn't understand the sort of cultural America and some of the things that set us apart from other countries, um, both for good and for bad. Because I mean, in the abstract, he's right. You need a bunch of
Mhm.
smart people, but it's more than just raw intelligence, right? That makes you an American. Sometimes it's the lack of intelligence that makes you American, depending on what state you're living in. But yeah, I think maybe probably you're right. Um, spending the first 18 whatever of his years living somewhere else. Um, and I partially also maybe just because of how he is, personality wise, he hasn't
Mhm.
picked up on some of the things that make us unique, that make us exceptional. And it's not like you can just get the smartest person from every country in the world and put them in a room together and make a great American product. You could certainly make a great product, but it wouldn't necessarily
Mhm.
be an American one.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one thing I want to throw out there about America is there's a fair amount of internet discourse, and I think just general discourse about what country is best, what country does what the best, would I rather be from X, Y, or Z country. Um, I think first off, it hardly needs to be said where you are from. You sort of have a natural allegiance to, just like you have a natural allegiance to your parents. You don't pick your parents. You don't pick your country. I think it's always reasonable to have a certain love for your country, even if that means disliking parts of it. But beyond that, I want to say about America that America has some unique virtues and flaws. And objectively, if America were the only country on earth, there are certain flaws, like a certain amount of utopianism and can doism and libertarianism, which in a single ideal objective country might be worth trying to extirpate, trying to get rid of.
Sure.
But America doesn't exist in a vacuum. When you go places that are not free, like Hong Kong, after the Chinese took it back in 1999 and have gradually just sucked it into the web of communist China, the Hong Kong patriots who were protesting for more independence, they were waving American flags and chanting USA, USA, because of what America stands for and sort of what it represents on the world stage. So I think I have somewhat more of an appreciation for America than maybe I would have otherwise, with the knowledge that America doesn't just exist for America; it exists for other places too. Um, and that's something worth bearing in mind. I'm not saying this isn't true of other countries as well. I'm just saying a country should not be measured in a vacuum, as if it's sort of independent of, especially in this day and age, the rest of the world. So, any thoughts on
Sure.
that?
Sure. No, I think that's fair enough. And it's um if you want to use like this is not an exact analogy, but you look at it like a plate of food or something. Like if you're making it your Thanksgiving plate and all you have on it
Mm-hmm.
is turkey, some people would argue that is the perfect plate, but
Yeah.
um, I think a lot of people would make an argument that no, you also need mashed potatoes and peas and cornbread or whatever else on there, and they will each, in an ideal situation, they'll elevate each other and they'll each be better
Mm-hmm.
for the other things being there. Um, and if you want to use that as sort of a loose analogy to the countries, yeah, they're each things that we really excel at, and they're each things that we probably don't do great at. But in
Yeah.
an ideal situation, we're all helping each other at the things we do best at.
Yeah. One thing about America I do want to point out, and this is sort of with the background of the massive European immigration following the Syrian civil war, which, God willing, is now basically over. Um, there was a lot of talk, sort of imitating American rhetoric, over in Europe, in places like Sweden and the United Kingdom, that saw massive immigration. That, oh, the United Kingdom has always been a country of immigrants or a nation of immigrants. That's nonsense. The UK population has been pretty darn steady since the Norman conquest 1,000 years ago. Um, that's not to say it can't tolerate immigrants, but the U.S. historically has been a nation of immigrants. I remember when we were first starting to see large waves of Latin American immigration in the late 90s and early 2000s. There was limited, the internet was limited back then, but I was able to do a little bit of research and see that early 20th century immigration, mostly by Irish and Italians, the proportion of population that were not born in the United States got up to about 15, 17% in around 1910, 1915, which is roughly the same peak we have seen in the United States around 2000. And again, in the mid 2020s, we're seeing about 15-ish% of the population born overseas. So the idea that this is sort of a historically unrivaled kind of wave of immigration is incorrect. So I do want to throw that out there. The U.S. has shown itself capable, and perhaps its vitality has been significantly fed by foreign immigration. That being said, the major immigration the U.S. has seen has been from other culturally similar places. Italy and Ireland are culturally very Christian, just like the English and German settlers who kind of settled the eastern United States first. And the same largely is true of the Latin American immigration we see now. Again, culturally Christian, sort of mostly Spanish, Portuguese kind of cultural background to the extent that there is a strong cultural background. Although with the H-1B visas, we're more often talking about Asians, in part just because there's so many people and so many educated people living in Asia. We're not getting H-1B visa holders from Africa because Africa doesn't have a strong collegiate education system. India does.
Yeah.
So to some extent, we're just talking about a population base. Anyway, any thoughts on that before we kind of roll on?
Well, do you think, because I would say the bulk of the Indians coming over are not Christian and don't have that cultural Christianity, I would think it's sort of proportionally harder to absorb them into our culture when you say compared to the Latin Americans coming over, simply because they come from such a different background.
Yeah, that may be the case. I think to some extent it remains to be seen. My inclination is to think that Indian culture has been such a melting pot of different ethnic groups and even to some extent of different religions. There is some Christianity there. There's definitely Islam around, mostly up toward Pakistan. But then Hinduism is there, but then you also have Buddhism kind of in the offing, and you have Shintoism off to the side. So I wonder if to some extent, also the Indian religions tend to be a little bit less, I don't know, beat you over your head the way Christianity and Islam
Descriptive.
can be.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I wonder if the Indian population actually tends to be pretty well suited to integration into a modern, multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, Western-style society,
Because
even though that didn't
they're
really
already
develop
their own.
organically.
Yeah, they're
Mhm.
already their own melting pot. So, interesting.
That's just a thought. I don't know if that's how things are going to turn out. But
Yeah. This brings up this is sort of a sideways thing, but talking about culture and sort of getting back to the original article,
mhm.
one of the things that I don't see talked about a whole lot is just the idea of what the decline in our culture has done to the overall working conditions. Because you have the older generations who, like we were talking earlier, have this idea that if you work hard, you'll get ahead, you'll get rewarded. All you have to do is put your head down. If you're always the hardest worker, that you'll get promoted, you'll get this, that, and the other. And I think that is something that maybe will only hold true if you are living in, or well, I don't know how to phrase this. Maybe will be truer the more virtuous a society you are living in, right? Because if you're living in a virtuous society, a virtue like hard work will be rewarded. The less virtuous your society is, as it declines, I would say the less virtue it will be rewarded, and the more it will just simply be exploited in a capitalist world. Um,
Hmm.
so one of the things that I think is happening or has happened between the baby boomers and the millennials is that our culture has declined. And so I would say, I mean, I've seen this myself and I've seen this with a lot of my peers. Um, there are a lot of millennials and younger who are actually trying to work hard and they're not being rewarded for it. And then they're getting jaded and burned out because
Hmm.
they were told all their lives, all you need to do is work hard and then your boss will promote you. And instead, because we live in a less virtuous society than what existed 50 years ago, they're not being rewarded. They're being exploited. The boss is saying, well, look, this person is doing twice as much work and I don't have to pay them anything else. This is great. So I don't know what
Yeah.
your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I was in an employment situation a few years ago where uh, I didn't work there very long, but basically it was a very small business, but reasonably profitable. And the owner of the business interviewed me prior to offering me a job. And one of the questions he had for me was effectively, what's the lowest amount of money that you'll work for? And then that's the amount of money he offered me. Um, and
But that is very, very common. And
yeah,
places will ask you to give a range. And, if you say 50K to 100K, guess what? They're offering you 50K. They're not offering you 75. They're certainly not offering you 100.
right. Yeah, whereas in I guess a more just society, what would I would hope to find, and ironically, in some cases, I found this to be sort of worse in faith-based contexts, where you would hope people would be kind of the most assiduous to assist their fellow man or woman. Um, but I hate being asked, "What's the least amount of money you're willing to do this work for?" Why can't employers instead think, um, this project I'm undertaking as the owner and runner of the business, I need it to work. I need to make ends meet. And if I'm not going to do reasonably well myself, then what's the point? But it's not just about me, and it's also not just about my product. It's also about the people who work with me and for me. Um, so could the attitude be a little bit more? And honestly, I see this in some larger American companies like the one I work for now, where the attitude is not what's the least you'll work for. It's here's what we normally pay people in the position we're about to offer you. And the company I work for even has a band
Mhm.
where if you're hired for a position at tier four or whatever it is, and your income is below the median that they're paying people at tier four in the company, every year when pay adjustments come around, you will get a bigger pay increase until you at least hit the median income level at your tier. So effectively, it's balancing people out. Now, obviously, there's performance related adjustment and so forth, but it's all sort of focused on we want to pay people sort of according to the work they're doing for us.
Yeah.
So, which is, I'm grateful for in my situation. Um, what did I have pulled up here? So going back to your comment about virtue and a society that departs from virtue, first off, I just want to throw it out there that I'm in any context, regardless of whether I'm talking to people I think value religion or not, I am at this point in my life unabashed to say I don't think that a society without Christianity is going to have legs, is going to go very far. Um, I think one of the great strengths of English society and really of European society has been sort of constantly renewed Christianity through time. In America, we even talk about the Great Awakenings. There were two Great Awakenings which took place here, which were basically sort of reconnecting with the roots of Christianity. And without this constant drive for renewal, I don't see virtue just sticking around. But another thing I want to throw out there, just to be clear, is this notion of virtue, which comes from the Greeks. Although the word virtue is Latin, I'm blanking on the Greek word. Arete, I think would be the correct Greek word for this, which would be more like excellence. It can mean two slightly different things. I think humans across time, whether good or bad, recognize excellence in certain human things. If you're really smart and really driven and get stuff done and fix problems, that's going to be recognized by bad people just as much as by good people. But there's also a way in which virtue means being morally upright. And I think specifically in the Christian context, I know there will be people who disagree with this, but I think Christianity at its roots, and this comes from the example that Jesus set, Christianity at its roots, more than any other religion, instills the idea that you sacrifice yourself first. That when it comes to making any sacrifice, you sacrifice yourself first. That's kind of the core of Christianity. And that instills a very particular kind of virtue in societies that are Christian for a long time. The idea that we're not going to sacrifice someone else. We're not going to go pillage the next guy or kill our children so that we're better off. It's going to be me first.
Yeah. So. It's going to be the lay down your life for a friend. Yeah.
Or someone who's not even your friend. I mean, Jesus came to people who didn't deserve him. So.
Well, I don't know. What do you think of? I mean, I would say it's. I don't think anyone would deny we've slid downward virtuously. But what I mean, I don't know. This is just asking you to predict the future. Where do you think we're going? Do you think there's another renewal in us?
Yeah, I guess I'm of two minds about the slide. I agree to some extent, and I also disagree. There were horrible things happening, morally speaking, in the United States throughout the 20th century. Probably the peak of racism in the United States was around the 1920s. We think about Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in baseball in, I think, 1956. In the 1890s, there were black baseball players. That only stopped being a thing in the 20th century. That's also when all the Civil War statues of Confederate generals and renaming highways after Confederate figures in the American South took place. It was the early 20th century, not the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. Then you have things like experiments on servicemen for stuff like LSD and worse chemical agents. You have things like lobotomies taking place. John and Robert Kennedy's younger sister suffered a botched lobotomy, which left her mentally and physically impaired for the rest of her life. So the idea that we're on a slide toward bad stuff, I think, is to some degree counterbalanced by the fact that 100 years ago we were doing some pretty bad stuff, which I think society at large would reject now, which actually represents a moral improvement in some regards. So while I am on the... Yeah.
Well, I would say we've just traded it for other bad stuff. Like, sure, we're not doing lobotomies anymore, but we are doing transgender surgeries. So it's sort of, we just swapped one for the other.
Yeah. Anyway, I just want to present some counterpoints. I think I am generally of the opinion that culture is on the gradual decline, but I think not entirely and not in all ways. I think in general this is true of cultures and of individuals, that you cannot stand still. You're either improving, and that's sort of a very conscious and probably painful process, or if you're doing a sort of, if you think you're standing still, you're actually managing decline.
Yeah.
And I think that's largely where we find ourselves as a culture. Maybe since World War II. World War II kind of represented this sort of renewal, I think, culturally. Um, but maybe particularly so since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Soviet Union, effectively. The end of history. If history ends, then you're kind of stuck in a managed decline. So.
Yeah.
So I pulled up some numbers to sort of corroborate the uh, the economic issues that younger people in America face today. So do you want me to run through this, or do you mind
Yeah.
if I run
Yep.
through this real quick? So this is a sort of a combination of statistics, and this is sort of scattershot, sort of best fit, kind of general numbers. So if anybody would like to comment on this and provide a counterpoint, I'm happy to hear that. But here are some general numbers from, this is sort of a combination of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, Census Bureau historical income tables, and Pew Research Center analysis of some of this government data. So first off, the percentage of dual income married couples. So instead of the husband alone working, the husband and wife working from 1960 to 2015 rose from 25% to 60%. So one could argue, well, wives are working because they can and they would like to, and having a higher income is nice because you can just do more cool stuff. Let's go on a vacation to the Bahamas. But you could also say, well, more couples are working because they have to. And I think the following information kind of bears that out. So looking at inflation adjusted 2023 dollars, single earner households in 1960 made $42,000. In 2023, they made $45,000. So that's flat. That's effectively flat. Now, this gets more interesting when you look at income compared to cost of living. So in the 1960s, a median single income earner could expect to pay per month $875 for housing. In 2023, it was $1,800. So you're talking at more than double the cost in 2023. Healthcare in 1960, $175 a month. In 2023, $450 a month, so almost triple. Food, roughly $400 a month in 1960 and 2023, so that's pretty flat, though you could argue about the quality of food. Transportation is up about 30%. Utilities, so water, electricity, is up about 30%. So then the total that a 1960s income earner is paying on sort of essential living needs, in 1960, it's $2,000 a month. And in 2023, it's about $3,500 a month. So you're looking at yearly in 1960, you've got about $17,000 worth of your income that you can save or put towards something else, and about $3,000 of income you can save or put to something else in 2023. So this is by the value of the dollar, inflation adjusted money. That I don't think paints the real picture, because you can see the cost of everything is up. How, if people are making the same money now, does everything, or is cost of living so much higher, getting close to double? If we break it down by purchasing power, that's when we start to see real numbers. Adjusting for purchasing power, not just inflation, median single income in 1970 was $9,500. Adjusted for 2023 is $98,000. Your median income was almost $100,000 in 1970. In 2023, median single income adjusted for purchasing power is $45,000. So if you're talking about people today making enough money to live on, and you actually factor in cost of living, cost of food, cost of healthcare, cost of transportation and utilities, the standard of living is almost half what it was 55 years ago. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean that, I would say that tallies with my own experience. Like the things that our parents and their generation sort of prepared me to expect or not the things that, once I got out into the real world, it was like, well, I'm not capable of this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for a long time, I sort of thought it was like it was my problem. Like I'd taken a wrong turning somewhere and I hadn't found, the big job in the city or whatever that was supposed to give me all these things that I'd heard our parents' generation talk about as just sort of normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it wasn't until more recently that, I mean, I didn't see these exact numbers, but similar sets of numbers, where I think I sort of realized, oh, this is just not. Um, I think people talk about our generation, the millennials, being one of the first ones where we're worse off than the previous generation.
Right. Yeah, and so a related topic that is covered in the Not the Bee article that I think is important and germane. That's a little bit redundant, but is the idea of what kinds of jobs are okay to look for. So if you're a here, here's the thing: our parents went to college, at least starting in the 1970s. For one thing, they paid their way through college without debt by working part time during the school year and by working during the summers. I did the same thing. I went to a fairly inexpensive college, and it was nowhere near possible to pay my way through college without coming out with debt. I came out with not quite as much debt as the amount of money that was spent on my tuition. So we're talking, you can make half. Um, so one of the things Matt Walsh and I think maybe Chris Rufo bring up in some of their tweets around this topic of sort of the standard of living and job expectations of younger people is go get a job working at, I don't know, Sheets is my classic example.
Panda Express.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Panda Express. Hey,
Uh,
kid, you got out of college with an engineering degree or whatever it is. You wanted to devote your life to something cool and intellectual and exciting. Stop that, smack. Go work at a fast food joint, kid.
yeah.
Um, and honestly, to young people today who want to make a living and like want to get married young and be able to raise a family, I would have to tell them, don't go to college, go to a trade school and become a plumber.
Yeah.
Within a couple of years, you'll have no debt from college and you'll be making six figures. You won't get that if you go to college. The only college graduates who get that are ones who go to the top tier schools in basically in finance or business management, or maybe law. Um, so I do think this is an important point that there is something to be said, especially for bright young people and for driven young people who want to do something exciting and interesting and something that doesn't just bring home a paycheck, but is exciting and worth devoting their life to. That in today's 2025 world, they're walking into a world where the jobs that are fun and exciting, you can't live off the income from those jobs. You can hardly live being a teacher.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you're dual income, almost every teacher I know,
Yeah.
those are dual income families. I think that's the
Yep.
only way to do it because you're being paid, 45, 50K. And um, yeah. Yeah. And I wouldn't say that I would necessarily object to working somewhere like Panda Express.
Mm-hmm.
But I think only if I went there straight out of high school, right? It is like you're saying, it's a huge slap in the face to go to college and then be told, well, the only good paying job that you can get is one at a fast food place. Um, because 4 years in college, you've spent all this time and all this money and all this debt, studying towards being something, and only to get out and be told, well, that was a waste of time and money. Why did you do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess being humbled can be good for people sometimes, but it's I think it's wrong to set up a situation that sort of intentionally puts people in that kind of predicament.
Sure.
And I also think look, historically speaking, go back 1,000, go back 5,000 years, and of course, humans struggled to survive. And the idea that we could all be peripatetics. So this is the Greek philosophers. Peripateo means to walk around. So the peripatetics, like Aristotle and Plato, famously, they would just walk around
Just hang
throughout
around at coffee
Athens,
shops,
chatting,
talk to people.
philosophizing. Yeah, um, I don't think peripatetics existed before the certainly not before, well, not long before Athenian Greece and sort of the Greek Golden Age. But I'm blanking on the civilizations that Mycenaeans and Minoans. As far as I can tell, the Minoans were sort of the precursors to classical Greece. Um, they had some bad luck with volcanoes in the Mediterranean. Uh, and then I don't know what the Egyptians were like. Anyway, just generally speaking, the idea that humans could have this opportunity to devote a lot of people in the population to be able to devote their lives to something intellectual, to the life of the mind, to great projects and endeavors. Sure, that's kind of historically relatively new. But the fact is, I think for nearly 100 years, it's been a realizable possibility for a lot of the population, and certainly since World War II. And the fact is that that possibility seems to be significantly regressing, and younger people are increasingly going to be pushed into trade industry jobs, whether it's taking care of people at an old folks' home, whether it's running a fast food store, or working in a Amazon warehouse. It seems like that's the direction we're going.
Yeah. Well, this is a real downer of an episode.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to bring up is in reading some of the Twitter or now X posts and replies, the amount of vitriol and hate that some of these people got. I just want to comment on this as a social phenomenon and see what your thoughts are, Veronica. So I have a Twitter account which I use a little bit. Um, there was a period about a year ago when I decided, okay, some people seem really into this Twitter thing, let me try it. So I started doing posts a couple times a week. And I did one post that went relatively viral. We're talking, I think it had close to 100,000 views and it had hundreds of replies. And it was my first and only viral post. And so I went through and I was sort of very focused on seeing like what was causing people to respond to this. And as I went through, roughly half of the responses to the post were just direct vitriolic ad hominem attacks on me. And I didn't really feel hurt by it or bothered by it. Honestly, my reaction was, what are you doing? This is an internet forum. What do you think
You're
this is
doing with
for?
your life.
Like, why are you calling me names? Like, I literally asked some of the people that, and a couple people ended up deleting their accounts. Maybe because they felt bad. But I was like, what? Explain to me like the positive value of what you've just added to the conversation here by calling me a poopy head. Um,
So it's not
but
what you're saying is it's not when people go viral, it's not the inherent uh you know truth or untruth of anything they've said. It's just the controversy that people are latching on
yeah,
to.
I think there is a lot of that, but I'm just kind of fascinated because I don't get my jollies from calling people on the internet names. Like that just that does absolutely nothing for me. Um, I don't know if you can. I don't know if you're more able than I am to get into the mind of the seemingly millions of people out there who something about calling people names in an anonymous, relatively anonymous forum on the internet makes them feel good or something.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny you bring this up because I am not on any social media except for Reddit. So I don't have a lot of experience with say
Thumbs
Twitter
up right there.
or Facebook. But even on Reddit, I find a lot of the forums that I'm on are just very, very polite. And I think it's because they're
Hmm.
mostly populated by people from Canada and the UK. And there's like this built-in filter on all of them that makes
Hmm.
them incredibly nice. Um, and I did like select, the Canada Reddit forum. It just happens to be that the things I look at on Reddit are in forums with a lot of polite people in them. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I also do not get that mind of, I'm going to, rather than punch a wall or do road rage or whatever, I'm going to call people names on the internet, and that's how I'm going to get out my angst for the day or something.
Yeah. Yeah. It has to be some kind of expression of some kind of inner distress, I think.
Memorial. Yeah.
It's just, I don't know that it's a particularly counterproductive one. It's just a wholly unproductive one, um, as far as I can tell. So, someone with a deeper insight into human nature, please correct us. Veronica, there's maybe one more thing I'd touch on regarding this article. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up?
No, no, go ahead.
Okay, so the last thing is, and maybe this is a big topic, but maybe we can just say a couple brief things. What is the personality or psychological profile of Matt Walsh? And I'm just using him as a token for people like this. Um, this sort of Paul Bunyan-y, ultra conservative slash libertarian. I can pull myself up by my bootstraps, and you better too. Responsibility is the only thing that matters. Everybody's entirely responsible for all the decisions they make. Um, you know, a hard will fix all problems, and you should. If I have that, you should too. Uh, do you have anything to say about this sort of personality?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, honestly, my first inclination is to say maybe he's never seen a lot of like actual hardship in his life. I don't know very little about Matt Walsh's background, but that honestly is my first inclination, is to say I don't think anyone can completely go it alone. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think all human beings exist in a way that we need other human beings, and you may go through a stretch of years where you do everything yourself, but at some point everybody needs help with something. And so yeah, I mean, I would be inclined to say maybe Matt Walsh has just been maybe he's just been handed everything. He's never had to do any actual hard
Silver
work.
platter. Yeah.
But I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking about what you're saying. I don't think it's true Matt Walsh was handed things on a platter. In fact, I think you see people who are handed things on a platter almost always self-destruct. Um,
Yeah.
Sort of the child actor phenomenon, or the child of wealthy parents phenomenon. Um, I wonder if there's sort of this middle ground. So, okay, so you get two ends of the spectrum. You get some people are handed everything on a platter, and they never learn self discipline or hard work. So they sort of fall off the edge. And then you get people for whom life is so hard and they are so incapable of dealing with it that they're damaged enough that they cannot deal with life, and
Mhm.
they fall off the opposite edge. And that there's sort of a sweet spot in the middle where you need life to be hard, you need to have challenges, you need obstacles to be presented to you, but obstacles which sort of match your abilities, or maybe you're a little too hard for your abilities right now, that you can surmount.
Right.
And that's sort of the life that humans are designed for. So when you find somebody who's fallen into that middle track, where their
They've
family
gotten sort of
circumstances,
appropriate challenges throughout their whole life.
yeah, and maybe that seemed really hard to them, and that makes sense because we should be facing and defeating the greatest challenges we are capable of facing and defeating. So, yeah, it should be really hard, but it was hard and they succeeded. It wasn't so hard that it destroyed them. Um, I think this is a category of person which tends to end up being sort of instinctively conservative and or libertarian, largely based on their personal experience that by working hard and taking responsibility, they were able to make things work. Um, I just don't. I don't think everybody fits in that category, and I think obviously there's a whole spectrum of how close you get to that category, but yeah, I guess that's what I'd have to say.
Yeah. No, that I think that seems reasonable. And I think maybe if you are in that category, it is for some people when they look around, it's hard to understand that not everyone else is also in that same category.
Yeah,
Because you
yeah,
look at someone who um, had the same challenges that you overcame, and you say, well, why can't they do it too? And you don't understand that for, whatever reasons, they are not capable of overcoming those challenges the same way you did.
yeah. I don't want to go further in part because I don't want to be uncharitable. Um, I don't think that way, I guess. That makes me a bleeding heart liberal. uh, I just, I don't believe that everybody can deal with the world that's given to them. Uh, Certainly not on their own. So,
Sure.
alrighty. Are you ready to jump to Wiki Roulette?
And favorite. Yes.
All right. Here we go. Wiki. Okay, so the rules. We get 3 chances, and let's see which article we want to talk about. The F&W Grand Silver Store building, also known as Hartfield's, in Broadway in Los Angeles.
We could go for that. I don't know.
Alrighty. I like the exterior. This looks Art Deco-y to me.
Yeah, like
I mean, look.
1920s.
Yeah, look at that. I mean, you're it's a little bit solid and concretey, but I don't know. You still got stone
Yeah.
accents there. But I like the design, sort of white stone. I mean, it might be concrete blocks, but it looks like stone. And then these really cool, large single pane windows with gold and
Decorative.
brown decorative accents.
Yeah, the bottom one they almost look like face shields across the bottom, like some sort of Greek soldiers standing in a line. Kind of.
And the upper ones look either like termite tracks in wood, or maybe some kind of Egyptian hieroglyph.
A hieroglyph of termite. Actually, it looks like a hieroglyph of like an ear of corn. Or maize.
So the F&W Grand Silver Store building, built in 1931. Blah blah blah. What I want to point out is this was a fascinating era, and I think the peak of American art, certainly when it comes to architecture, was America in the 19 teens in the biggest cities, but then the 20s and 30s elsewhere, like Los Angeles was kind of elsewhere back then. We got to the level where we were building stuff that was just as good as the great European buildings of that era and before. Like, this is when all the most beautiful churches in the U.S. were built. There's a really cool, up in Montgomery County, Maryland, old resort site, which was then during World War II used as a medical site, which is just this array of buildings. So there's a massive hotel which has been renovated, which is sort of Shakespearean Tudor style, but then right across from it is a large Greek temple, and it's rather kind of pathetic because parts of it are falling down, but also really cool. But it was built in the 1920s and 30s, same kind of era. I hope this isn't in the territory of the Eden Fire. It looks, based on the map, not too far from there.
I don't think it is. Yeah, it's a shame that I think that was all sort of stopped by World War II because we put all, obviously all of our efforts went into that. And I think we've never really
And
come back.
yeah, and I think the Great Depression as well. I think, especially on the East Coast in Chicago, you saw after 1929, construction dramatically declined.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It would be fun to see like a new style. Like even nowadays you see very beautiful things that are built, but they're just built in an old style, right? Like they're
yeah,
churches around here, office buildings around here where they look great and they were built, within the last 5 years, but they're just built, in a Gothic style or a Greek style, whatever it is.
yeah.
Um,
I'm wearing today a Catholic University jacket, and the campus there is kind of a tale of American architecture in the 20th and 21st centuries. So that school was founded in the late 1800s. Um, the older buildings are absolutely spectacular, spectacularly beautiful. And then you hit the 1950s, it gets a little weird. The buildings constructed in the 60s and 70s at Catholic University are hideous, and they have no light. They're just concrete brutalist nonsense.
yeah,
Around 2000, you start getting some weird, funky designs, but not particularly good looking. And then in the last 10 years, like some of the newer residential halls, they're like colonial America style. Like they're pretty.
yeah,
Yeah, they're nice. I think the same could be said for some newer apartment buildings in the DC area. You're seeing larger windows, but kind of more traditional styles, nice brick accents, architectural elements set off from each other, not just one big block. Um, but it does kind of seem like a recovery from a
yeah.
really, really bad period architecturally.
We went through a lot of bad years to get back to this.
Yeah, I think I don't know if this is more appropriate to bring it up in some other context, but I'm a big fan of John Paul II. But the church he got built at Nova Huta, which was a Soviet settlement that the
Ugly.
Soviets were building in the
Such an ugly
60s,
church.
that's one of the most ugly churches I've ever seen. So
Yeah. Well,
there's no
I
accounting
have
for taste
good
sometimes.
good news or bad news. I'm not sure what this is. I just pulled them up on Google Street View just to see what it looks like. And
Hmm.
the Street View is from June of 2024, so 6 months ago, and there is a big for lease sign in front of the building.
Are you saying we can move in?
Yeah, I mean, we could apparently. I mean, unless someone's leased it in the last 6 months, but it looks. I mean, this picture is from 6 months ago. It looks like it's in decent shape.
Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah,
on a historic register now, National
yeah.
Historic Register. So it's protected at this point. Just shout out to the Los Angeles area. I just came back from Palm Springs, which was nice. Much better than Virginia, where it's been a frozen ice escape for the last week. So it was nice to escape. It was like 65 and sunny every day.
Nice.
All right, Veronica. Anything else to say about the F&W Grand Silver Store building?
Oh, it looks fancy though. I do kind of want my house to look like that. I mean, not an apartment building, but I would move into an Art Deco house. That would be.
Yeah, yeah. I think we can agree on that point. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you in episode 6.
See ya.